Welcome back, everybody, to another deep dive. And today we're taking a look at the Online Teaching Survival Guide, Simple and Practical Pedagogical Tips by Judith V. Bircher and Rita Marie Conrad.
Oh, yeah.
That's a mouthful. You
Mm.
sent this one in.
I did.
And I'm excited to kind of dig into this
You too.
because I'm always trying to refine
Mm-hmm.
my own, online teaching skills or blended learning.
Right.
And I know
It's always changing.
this is a topic that a lot of our listeners are interested in.
Yeah, it's been a huge shift, and especially,
Yeah.
we saw what happened in 2020 with
Right.
the pandemic.
And it's interesting because this book is from 2021, so it's kind of right in the thick of it.
It is.
And I know that in the intro, they talk about how good face-to-face teaching doesn't always translate
Mhm.
to good online teaching.
Doesn't it all? And, it's funny because I think a lot of people think,
Right.
oh, I'm a good teacher.
Yeah.
In person, I can just do the same thing online.
Yeah.
It'll be fine.
Throw it up on the LMS and it's good to go.
And it's so not true, and it's not fair to the students, and I think a lot of times
Yeah.
the students end up suffering from it.
Right. So yeah, and that's our mission here today, is to really pull out the best tips from this book
Absolutely.
about how to teach and learn effectively online.
And what I think is so great about this book is it's very practical.
Yes.
They're not just talking theory. They're
Right.
giving you very specific
Right.
tips and tools that you can actually implement in your online courses.
Yeah. It's a good mix of both because they start out by talking about, the pedagogical principles,
Yes.
but then they move into what to do and even how to use technology in a way
Right.
that is learner-centered, which I really appreciated about this book.
Yeah.
I noticed that. They structure the whole book around 4 phases of a course.
Mm-hmm.
So the beginnings, early, middle, late middle,
Yes.
and the closing weeks.
Exactly.
So I thought that was interesting, and we're going to go through each of those.
That's a good way to structure our conversation, too, because it gives us a framework to follow.
Right. But before we even jump into that, let's talk about some of the core principles
Yes.
that they lay out at the beginning of the book.
Okay.
Because I think those are super important. And they actually give 10
core learning principles.
10 core learning principles right off the bat.
And so they're really emphasizing that it's all about the learner, right?
Right.
So it's not about you as the instructor
Mm-hmm.
putting your content out there. It's about how the learner is receiving that.
Yeah.
How are they interacting with it?
And they're coming at it with their own knowledge.
Yes.
Their own background.
Exactly. They're not blank slates.
Yeah, and their own goals even.
Right.
Like, what are they hoping to get out of this course?
Absolutely. And I think that's something that a lot of instructors forget sometimes. We get so focused on our content
Right.
that we forget who's on the other end.
Yeah. And I liked how they talk about the 4 essential elements of a structured learning experience. So
Yeah.
it's the learner, the mentor, the knowledge/content, and the environment/context.
Yeah. And you'll notice they use the word mentor instead of instructor or teacher
Right.
because they really want to emphasize that guidance role,
Right.
facilitating the learning process.
Not just the sage on the stage.
Right.
You're more of a guide.
You're a guide on the side.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I thought that was interesting.
It's a good distinction.
Now we've got to talk about constructivism.
Yes.
Because this is something that they bring up.
That's a foundation of the book,
Yeah.
really.
Yeah.
It's this idea that learners are actively constructing their own knowledge.
Right.
So they're not just passively receiving it from you.
Right. It's not just pouring into their brains.
Exactly. It's not a banking model of education.
Yeah.
They're taking what you're giving them, and they're making meaning of it.
They're building on what they already know.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that's why it's so important to tap into that prior knowledge.
Right.
Find out what they already know,
Yeah.
and then build on that.
Okay. So that's constructivism.
Yes.
And then the other big theory that they talk about is social learning theory, which is really interesting.
Which is perfect for online because you can create those social learning opportunities.
Right.
So much of what we learn comes from interacting with others
Mm-hmm.
and from our environment, from the context that we're in.
So in a way, online learning can be a really good
Oh, absolutely.
space for social learning.
Yeah, you can create those communities of practice
Right.
where students are learning from each other.
And they're supporting each other.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And you're just there to guide that process.
To nudge it along.
Right.
And they mention a lot of theorists in this book.
Oh, yeah. They bring in a lot of the big names.
Yeah. Like just to kind of give a background.
Yeah.
Vygotsky, Brunner.
Langer.
They're all there.
Yeah.
And they're pulling those key ideas from each of them.
Right. And I like that. They give you the essence of it.
Yeah. Like you don't need to go read all of these theorists.
You don't have to go back to the original sources.
Yeah. And it's helpful to kind of have that background knowledge.
It is.
Okay. So those are the core principles now. let's jump into course beginnings.
Okay.
What happens in that initial phase of a course?
So this is so important because this is where you're setting the tone
Mm-hmm.
for the whole rest of the learning experience.
Right. First impressions matter.
They really do, and you're laying that foundation.
Yeah.
So one of the big things that they talk about is establishing presence.
Mm-hmm.
And they break presence down into 3 types.
Okay.
So there's social presence,
Okay.
which is that sense of community that we were talking about.
So students feeling like they're connected to each other,
Exactly, like they're part of a group.
even though they might be geographically dispersed.
Right.
Yeah.
Even if they're never meeting in person.
Yeah.
Then there's teaching presence,
Okay.
which is your role in designing and facilitating the learning experience.
So that's you as the instructor.
That's you making sure that the course is well organized, that the activities are engaging,
Right.
that you're providing feedback and support.
And then cognitive presence.
Yes, cognitive presence is so important. This is how students are making sense of the material.
Mm.
Are they connecting it to their prior knowledge?
Hmm.
Are they applying it to new situations?
So this is more on the student side of things.
It is. But you as the instructor, you have a role in fostering that cognitive presence.
Right.
So you can design activities that promote discussion,
Mm-hmm.
that encourage students to think critically,
Okay.
to challenge each other's ideas.
Yeah.
So establishing those 3 types of presence right from the beginning, that's crucial for a successful online course.
And I liked how they talk about specific things that you can do
Oh, yeah.
to make that happen.
It's not enough to just say, oh, I want my students to feel connected.
Right.
You have to actually do things to make that happen.
Well, what kinds of things can you do?
So they talk about getting acquainted forums,
Okay.
which are a classic
Mm-hmm.
icebreaker activity.
Right. Like, tell us your favorite hobby.
Exactly. But they say take it a step further.
Okay.
Don't just have it be social. Have it be cognitive, too.
What does that mean, cognitive?
So instead of just saying, what's your favorite hobby? Ask them, what are your learning goals for this course?
Oh, okay.
Or what experience do you have with this topic?
Okay.
So they're already starting to think about the content. And they're sharing that with each other
Right. From the very beginning.
from the very beginning.
Okay. And then, of course, the syllabus.
Oh, yes. The syllabus is crucial. That's your contract with the students.
Right. And they talk about making it really clear.
Very clear.
And I like that they even mention things like netiquette.
Yes. Netiquette is so important in online courses.
What is that?
That's basically like online etiquette.
Oh, okay.
So how to communicate respectfully with each other in an online environment. Because things can get misinterpreted very easily
Oh, yeah.
through text.
Right.
So making sure that you're setting those expectations
Yeah.
early on is super important.
So not just what are the assignments,
Right.
but how are we going to communicate?
How are we going to communicate?
How are we going to treat each other?
How are we going to interact as a community
Right.
so that everyone feels safe and respected?
Okay. And I know they mentioned a bunch of resources,
Oh, yeah.
like quality standards,
Mm.
rubrics.
Right.
Can you talk about some of those?
Yeah. So they talk about the online course quality review rubric,
OSCQR.
OSCQR.
I like that.
I know it's a mouthful, but it's a really good resource to make sure that your online course is meeting certain quality standards.
And that's actually something that you can use
Yeah,
yourself. Absolutely. You as the instructor, you can use that.
You can self-assess.
You can self-assess.
And then they also mention the Online Learning Consortium
Yes.
and the National Standards for Quality Online Learning,
Mm-hmm.
which are all great organizations
Yeah.
with really helpful resources.
Tons of resources.
Yeah, so I encourage listeners to check those out.
And then another thing I really liked about this section is this idea of bookending.
Oh yeah, bookending is such a cool idea.
Can you explain what that is?
So basically, you're starting and ending the course with similar activities.
Okay.
So for example, you could have a pre-course survey
Mm-hmm.
where students are reflecting on their current knowledge and skills. And then at the end of the course, you give them the same survey again.
And then they can see how far they've come.
Exactly. They could see their own growth.
And that's really motivating.
It is.
That,
Especially in an online environment where sometimes it can feel like you're just
yeah.
clicking through modules.
Checking boxes.
Right.
So this gives them a chance to actually reflect
It does.
on what they've learned.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's course beginnings.
Yes.
Now we're moving into the early middle.
Okay.
What's happening here?
So now you've laid the foundation.
Mm-hmm.
You've built that sense of community. You've established your presence. Now it's time to really dive into the content. So this is where you're guiding students through projects. You're nurturing that learning community that you've created. And you're really starting to assess their learning in a more ongoing way.
Okay, so we're moving from big picture to more of the specifics.
Exactly.
And they talk about continuous and multi-phased assessment.
Yes, so this is super important because instead of just having those big high-stakes exams at the end,
Mm-hmm.
you're checking in with students more regularly.
Okay.
So you can see how they're doing, you can provide feedback.
And they're getting more practice.
Exactly. And it reduces that anxiety
Right.
of having everything riding on one or two big tests.
Okay, so what kinds of things can you use for continuous assessment?
Oh, there's so many options. You can use discussions.
Hmm.
You can use low-stakes quizzes.
Like just to check for understanding?
Exactly. Not for a grade, necessarily.
Okay.
You can have short papers, case studies, even customized projects.
And this gives students a chance to kind of experiment
It does.
and maybe try things out
Ah.
and get feedback without it being
A huge
without it being so high stakes.
deal.
Yeah.
And they also talk about the importance of feedback.
Oh, feedback is essential. And they emphasize giving timely feedback.
Right.
So don't wait until the end of the semester to give students feedback on their work.
And they even give you permission to. Be kind to yourself.
Yes, be kind to yourself.
Because grading online can be
It can be a lot,
very time-consuming.
especially if you have a lot of students.
Right.
So don't feel like you have to grade everything perfectly. Just focus on giving students the feedback that they need to improve.
To move forward.
Exactly.
Okay.
And then another important thing in this phase is to think about potential student challenges
Oh, yeah.
and have strategies in place to prevent them.
So instead of just waiting for things to go wrong,
Right, be proactive.
be proactive.
Think about what might happen and what you can do to prevent it.
Okay.
So, for example, if you know that students often struggle with time management,
Mm-hmm.
you can build in some time management activities into the course. Okay. Or if they tend to procrastinate, you can have smaller deadlines.
They're frequent deadlines.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah, chunking it up.
Check it up.
Yeah, great.
And then this is also a good time to start incorporating some metacognitive strategies.
Metacognitive strategies.
Yeah.
What are those?
So that's basically helping students think about how they're learning.
Okay.
So you can have them do things like reflect on their learning process,
Mm-hmm.
identify their strengths and weaknesses as learners, set learning goals for themselves.
Okay. And this helps them to kind of take ownership
It does.
of their own learning.
Yeah.
Which is so important,
It is.
especially online, where it can be so easy to just kind of zone out and
To be passive.
be passive. Yeah.
Right.
And they also talk about memory strategies, which I
Yes.
thought was interesting.
Memory strategies are super important.
Because I think a lot of times we just kind of assume that students know how to study, and,
Right.
and they don't always.
They don't, and there are certain techniques that can be really helpful for memory.
Like what kinds of things?
So things like spaced repetition,
Okay.
active recall, elaboration. All of these things can help students remember information better.
So you're actually giving them the tools to learn more effectively.
Exactly. You're not just throwing information at them. You're teaching them how to learn.
Yeah, I like that.
Yeah.
Okay, so we're in the early middle. Things are going well.
Mm-hmm.
Now we move to the late middle.
Okay.
This sounds like things are getting intense.
They are heating up.
Yeah.
So now students are really starting to take ownership of their learning.
Mhm.
They're thinking more critically. They're asking deeper questions.
Okay.
And you as the instructor, you're there to guide them,
Mm-hmm.
to provide feedback and support, but you're also stepping back a little bit,
Okay.
giving them more space to explore.
So you're fading out a little bit.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And questioning becomes really central in this phase.
Okay.
So encouraging students to ask questions
Mm-hmm.
that reveal their understanding.
So not just what's the answer.
Right. Not just factual recall questions.
Yeah.
But questions that show that they're really thinking about the material.
Like how does
Yeah.
this connect to that? Or
Right.
what are the implications of?
Exactly. Or what if this happened?
Right. Okay.
So deeper level questions.
Okay.
And you can also help them to identify patterns and relationships within the material.
So they're starting to see the big picture.
Exactly.
How all the pieces fit together.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And this is also where you're really focusing on those core concepts
Mm-hmm.
and helping students to apply them to more complex problems. So they're not just regurgitating information,
Right.
they're actually using it.
They're using it to solve problems.
Exactly.
Okay. And I know they mentioned the standards for thinking,
Oh, yes. The standards for thinking.
which I thought was really interesting.
It's a great framework.
And it's not just for students, it's for instructors too.
It is for everyone.
So can you give us an overview of what those standards are?
Okay, so there are 8 of them. And they're basically criteria for evaluating thinking.
Okay.
So is your thinking clear?
Okay.
Is it precise? Is it accurate?
Mm-hmm.
Is it relevant to the task at hand? Is it deep enough? Is it broad enough?
Yeah.
Is it logical? Is it fair?
Okay.
So those are the 8 standards. And you can use those standards
Mm-hmm.
to guide your questioning of students.
Mm-hmm.
And you can also encourage students to use those standards when they're evaluating their own thinking.
Okay, so it's a way to help them become more
Self-aware.
self-aware, more critical thinkers.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And in this phase, they also talk about moving beyond knowledge integration
Mhm.
to problem definition and solution proposing.
Right. So they're not just putting the pieces together.
Mm-hmm.
They're actually saying, okay, here's a problem.
Mm-hmm.
How can we solve it? Here are some possible solutions.
And that takes it to a whole other level.
It does.
Yeah.
And this is where personalized feedback becomes even more important
Yeah.
because each student is coming up with their own solutions.
Mm-hmm.
So you need to be able to give them feedback that's tailored to their individual needs.
And rubrics can be helpful for that.
Rubrics are essential for this
Mm-hmm.
because they provide that clear criteria
Mm-hmm.
for what you're looking for. And they can help to ensure that your feedback is consistent and fair.
Right.
And you can even use rubrics for critical thinking.
Oh, okay.
So you could assess things like, how well did the student analyze the problem?
Mm-hmm.
How creative were their solutions? How well did they justify their choices?
Okay.
So you can really go deep with rubrics and provide students with very specific feedback.
Okay. And then managing group projects effectively.
Oh, yes, group projects can be a challenge online,
Mhm.
but they can also be a really valuable learning experience.
Right.
So they talk about things like setting clear expectations,
Mm-hmm.
providing structure and support,
Mm.
and using technology tools to facilitate collaboration.
Right.
And then they also talk about using social networking tools to further build that sense of community.
So we're kind of bringing all of this together now.
We are.
Yeah, and I like that they mentioned bringing in expert guests.
Oh, yeah, that's a great idea to give students real-world insights.
Because sometimes as instructors, we can be a little bit
We can be in our own bubble.
in our own bubble. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so we're in the late middle. Things are really humming along.
They're really cooking.
Yeah.
And now it's time for the closing weeks,
Okay, the home stretch.
the home stretch.
What are we doing here?
So now it's time to bring everything together
Mm-hmm.
to assess what students have learned and to look ahead to the future.
Okay.
So one of the things they suggest is using what-if scenarios.
Okay.
So getting students to think about the implications of what they've learned.
So applying it to new situations.
Exactly. Or thinking about different possibilities.
Okay.
And this can be a really fun way
Mm-hmm.
to engage students in those final weeks.
Right.
Because sometimes they're getting a little bit burnt out by that point.
Great.
So this can be a way to kind of re-energize them, get them thinking in new ways.
Okay. And then they also talk about learner-led activities.
Yes. So this is where you're giving students more control over their own learning.
Oh.
So you can have them do things like create presentations or lead discussions
Mhm.
or even design their own projects.
So they're becoming the experts.
Exactly. They're sharing their knowledge with each other.
Yeah. And then concept mapping.
Concept mapping is a great tool for consolidating knowledge.
Right.
It's a visual way to see how all the pieces fit together.
Yeah.
So you can have students create concept maps individually
Mm-hmm.
or in groups,
Mm-hmm.
and it's a really good way for them to review the material.
Okay. And then they talk about stories and cases.
Yes, stories and cases are so powerful for reinforcing those core concepts.
Because it makes it more real.
It does.
Yeah.
It brings it to life.
And then gamification.
Gamification could be a fun way to energize learning in those final weeks.
So things like points and badges,
Exactly.
leaderboards. Okay.
And then a really simple but brilliant way to get feedback for future courses
Mm-hmm.
is to ask students, what one change would you recommend?
Oh, I like that.
It's so simple, but it can be so insightful.
Yeah.
And you can get some really valuable feedback from students that way.
And it shows that you care.
It does. It shows that you're listening.
Yeah. Okay. So those are the 4 phases of a course.
Yes.
But they also have this whole section on best practices for online teaching, which I thought was really helpful.
They call it 10 plus 4.
10 plus 4. Okay.
Yeah.
So let's talk about the 10 first.
Okay.
What are some of those top 10 best practices?
So number 1, be present at the course site.
Okay.
So don't just set it and forget it.
Right.
Be there, be active, be engaged.
Respond to students.
Yeah.
Okay.
Number 2, create a supportive online course community.
Mm-hmm.
So this is where you're using those getting acquainted forums. You're encouraging interaction. You're fostering a sense of belonging. Number 3, develop explicit expectations
Okay.
for communication and workload.
So this is that clear syllabus.
Exactly. No surprises.
Lay it all out.
Yeah.
Okay.
Number 4, use a variety of large group, small group, and individual work.
Mm-hmm.
So mix it up.
Right.
Don't just have students working on their own the whole time. Give them opportunities to interact with each other
Okay.
in different ways.
Okay.
Number 5, use synchronous and asynchronous activities.
So live and flexible.
Exactly. Give students some choice.
Okay.
Number 6, ask for informal feedback early.
So check in with students.
Mm-hmm. See how they're doing. See what's working, what's not working.
Okay.
Number 7, prepare discussion posts that invite engagement.
So don't just ask yes or no questions.
Right. Ask open-ended questions. Ask questions that spark debate.
Okay.
Number 8, think digital and mobile.
Okay.
So make sure that your content is accessible
Hmm.
on all devices.
So not just assuming that everyone's on a desktop.
Exactly. Number 9, combine core concept learning with personalized learning.
Mm-hmm.
So give students that foundation.
Mm.
But also give them opportunities to explore their own interests,
Right.
to go deeper into certain topics.
Right.
And number 10, plan a good closing.
So don't just let it fizzle out.
Right.
Have an intentional ending.
Yes.
Okay. And then they have the +4.
A +4.
So what are those?
So number 1, assess as you go.
Mm-hmm. We talked about that.
Continuous assessment.